A profound hush descended upon Manhattan's most elite dining establishment, the kind of silence that feels almost tangible. All chatter stopped. Forks and knives remained suspended mid-bite as countless pairs of eyes turned toward the narrow aisle between dining tables. 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery trembled visibly. His legs, secured in metallic support braces, wobbled as he extended his hand toward Diana Johnson, the establishment's sole African-American server. The live pianist had just started a gentle tune, and the child's sudden urge to invite someone to dance caught everyone off guard. "Sir, please manage your child." Manager Thornton's crisp voice sliced through the quiet atmosphere. "This behavior is unacceptable. This establishment is not a ballroom, and our staff members aren't here for children's entertainment." Richard Montgomery, head of Montgomery Investments and among America's wealthiest individuals, felt his throat tighten. This marked his first attempt at taking Lucas to a public dinner since the incident that left his legs partially paralyzed 2 years prior, an outing he vowed never to repeat. "Lucas, take your seat," came the quiet but authoritative command. Diana stood perfectly, still, her eyes moving between the manager, the billionaire, and the young boy whose outstretched hand remained in the air. Throughout her 5 years of employment here, she had mastered the art of remaining unnoticed, particularly around patrons like Montgomery. "Mr. Thornton, I'm departing. My work shift has ended." Her tone remained steady as she untied her apron and set it on her serving tray. Then, shocking everyone present, she offered Lucas a warm smile and grasped his hand. "Dancing in an apron simply won't do." Richard shot to his feet. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Diana met his intense stare. "I'm responding to an invitation, sir." Before anyone could intervene, Lucas took an uncertain step forward. His foot scraped painfully along the floor, and his metal braces created a harsh scratching sound. Yet Diana made no attempt to direct him or rush his movements. She simply matched her rhythm to his. "She'll be terminated by morning," a woman at a nearby table murmured quietly. Richard observed, frozen in place. A vivid memory suddenly surfaced. Elizabeth, his deceased wife, dancing with Lucas in their family room. "Perfection isn't the goal," she had told him. "Connection is what matters." As Diana mirrored Lucas's awkward movements, something shifted in the boy's expression. Terror transformed into focused determination. Embarrassment gave way to quiet confidence. For the first time since his accident, no one was guiding, assisting, or correcting him. He was taking the lead. "Mr. Montgomery," the manager's voice broke through his reflection, "I guarantee this incident won't occur again. She will face appropriate consequences." Richard remained silent. The entire restaurant seemed to await his response. After all, someone with his influence could destroy any career with a single statement. Staff members paused their duties. Other diners watched with morbid fascination, yet Lucas's joyful expression was the only thing echoing in his thoughts. Diana escorted the boy back to his table after 3 dance movements. "Thank you for the invitation," she said respectfully, addressing him as she would any adult. "It was truly my pleasure." As she turned to depart, Richard called out, "Wait." His voice carried a different quality, almost foreign to his own ears. "What is your complete name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." Richard nodded deliberately. "Diana Johnson," he repeated, as though committing it to memory. He then retrieved a business card from his jacket and extended it toward her. "My office, tomorrow at 10 in the morning." The entire restaurant held its collective breath. Diana accepted the card with composed dignity, though her fingers shook slightly. "Father?" Lucas called as she walked away. "What made you do that?" The why question lingered like an indictment. Richard looked at his son and momentarily saw not just the child Elizabeth had entrusted to his care, but a whole person whose desires and requirements he had systematically overlooked for 2 years. As dinner continued in uncomfortable silence, no one observed Diana's final glance before her departure. It wasn't filled with fear or defeat, but with a quiet resolve that stood in stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in Richard Montgomery's gaze. If this tale of respect and change is already stirring your emotions, remember to subscribe to our channel to discover how one simple act of dignity can ignite a quiet revolution capable of transforming lives permanently. The entrance hall of Montgomery Tower gleamed with its glass and marble surfaces, catching the morning sunlight. Diana Johnson felt immediately out of place in her finest attire, a navy blue skirt and white blouse purchased on clearance. The people walking past her wore clothing that likely cost more than her monthly expenses. "Diana Johnson here to meet Mr. Montgomery," she informed the receptionist, who scrutinized her with a clinical examination before placing a call. "18th floor. Miss Winters will assist you." Inside the elevator, Diana inhaled deeply, gripping her weathered handbag against her chest. What she experienced wasn't fear. It was a quiet resolve that came from having endured far worse situations. Miss Winters appeared to be a woman in her 40s with a penetrating gaze and flawless posture. "Mr. Montgomery is currently on a conference call. Please come with me." Walking through the mirrored corridors, Diana sensed the curious stares of employees. A black woman being guided through the executive floors was unusual enough to spark whispered conversations. "He had you dismissed, didn't he?" Winters asked abruptly, when they were alone in a waiting area. "It's common. Influential clients make calls and people like you lose employment opportunities. People like me. You understand my meaning?" Winters repositioned her eyeglasses. "Staff members who forget their position." Diana smiled without humor. "And where precisely would that position be?" Before Winters could respond, her telephone rang. "He's ready for you now." Richard Montgomery's office occupied half the entire floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan appeared like a distant recreational area. The man stood facing outward, observing the city as though it belonged to him personally. "Mr. Montgomery?" Diana addressed him professionally. Richard turned, his expression a carefully controlled mask. "Miss Johnson, I appreciate you coming." He gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." The silence that followed was deliberate. A strategy Diana immediately recognized. It was the type of quiet designed to make anxious individuals speak excessively and potentially incriminate themselves. "Do you possess formal qualifications?" Richard finally inquired. "Pardon me?" "Education. University." "Background." Diana maintained steady eye contact. "Bachelor's degree in child development from NYU, unfinished master's program in special education." Something flickered across Richard's features. Surprise, perhaps. "And yet you're employed as a server." "I actually work 3 positions. Restaurant, weekend shifts at a bookstore, and tutoring when I can secure students." Richard approached his desk, lifting a folder. "I conducted some investigation into your background, Miss Johnson. I wanted to understand the person who," he hesitated, "danced with my son." He opened the folder, revealing printed photographs of a community center. "Freedom Steps. You established this 6 years ago." Diana straightened in her seat. "I co-founded it with my sister Zoe. It's a dance program for children with physical disabilities." Richard flipped through several documents. "Which is currently facing closure due to insufficient funding." Diana showed no surprise. Naturally, he would discover all this information within a day. "I didn't come here to request financial assistance, Mr. Montgomery." "Then what brought you here?" "Because you extended the invitation." Richard chuckled softly, a sound devoid of joy. "Fair point." He stood again, restless. "I want to offer you employment." Diana blinked, genuinely surprised. "As a server in your home?" Richard's expression hardened. "As a therapeutic companion for Lucas." His son's name seemed challenging for him to pronounce. Diana noticed how his gaze briefly wandered to a photograph on his desk. A smiling woman holding an infant. "I employ the nation's finest specialists," Richard continued. "Physical therapists, neurologists, psychologists. But what you accomplished yesterday—" He paused as if the words betrayed him. "It was simply a dance, Mr. Montgomery." "It was the first time I've witnessed him smile since the accident." The confession was clearly painful. "I don't want a dance instructor for my son. I want someone capable of doing what you did. Following rather than leading." Diana studied the man before her. Beneath his facade of power and control, she recognized what others might miss: a desperate, lost father. "I can compensate you 5 times your current earnings." Diana rose from her chair. "No." Richard appeared shocked, like someone unaccustomed to that word. "I don't work for individuals who see only my race or economic status before recognizing my abilities," she explained calmly. "And I certainly don't work for people who attempt to purchase solutions to emotional challenges." Richard's face reddened. "You're rejecting an offer that would resolve your financial difficulties out of pride?" "Out of dignity," Diana corrected. "And because your son deserves more than someone hired to feign care." She walked toward the door, then stopped. "Lucas doesn't need additional experts. He needs space to direct his own life. You don't understand my son." "No," Diana agreed. "But I understand people like him, individuals whose physical limitations pale in comparison to the invisible barriers we construct around them." She took a card from her purse and placed it on the desk. "Freedom Step sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. If you'd like to bring Lucas, the initial session is complimentary." As Diana departed, she passed Winters, who had clearly been eavesdropping. "You just declined an offer from Richard Montgomery," she whispered in disbelief. "Have you lost your mind?" Diana smiled. "Perhaps, but I'd rather be foolish than be someone's possession." The following Wednesday found Diana at the community center's reception when Zoe, her sister and program co-founder, rushed over breathlessly. "There's a Bentley parked outside," she whispered, nervously adjusting her hijab. "And you won't believe who's inside." Through the window, Diana spotted the luxury vehicle. Lucas sat in the back seat, gazing anxiously through the glass. Richard remained behind the wheel, his hands still gripping it as if engaged in an internal struggle. "He won't come inside," Zoe predicted. "Men like him don't visit places like this." Diana smiled, recalling Lucas's expression during those brief dancing moments. "Don't underestimate a determined child's influence." As they observed, the car door opened. Lucas emerged slowly, adjusting his equipment. Then, surprising everyone, Richard exited as well. The billionaire looked displaced in his casual trousers and sweater, an obvious attempt to dress down, yet still radiating privilege. "I told you he'd arrive," Diana murmured to herself. Zoe stared at her. "What exactly did you do?" Diana didn't respond, but her eyes held a secret sparkle that even her sister couldn't fully comprehend. In her small Bronx apartment, hidden beneath her bed, lay a notebook filled with observations about children like Lucas and men like Richard Montgomery. Years of research, study, and a plan that had begun with simply accepting a dance invitation. What Richard Montgomery couldn't know, what he couldn't imagine from his world of glass towers and endless bank accounts, was that Diana Johnson wasn't merely a waitress who had agreed to dance with his son. She was a woman with a purpose. And his empire of isolation and privilege was about to face its greatest challenge: the simple truth that life's most valuable lessons cannot be purchased. They must be experienced. Freedom Steps operated from a converted community warehouse. Handmade banners adorned the walls with messages like "Your rhythm, your rules," and "Every movement matters." When Richard and Lucas entered, children with various mobility aids practiced free-form movements to a gentle beat. "Mr. Montgomery," Diana approached, dressed in simple clothing bearing the program's logo. "Welcome." Lucas watched the children in wonder. A girl in a wheelchair performed precise spins, while a boy with a prosthetic leg created his own step sequence. "It appears disorganized," Richard commented, visibly uncomfortable. "There is structure," Diana replied. "It's simply not the type you're familiar with." She turned to Lucas. "Would you like to participate?" The boy nodded eagerly but glanced at his father hesitantly. "Go ahead," Richard said tensely. "I'll remain right here." As Diana guided Lucas toward the group, Zoe approached Richard and offered him a seat. "The first day is always most challenging," she observed. "For the parents, not the children." "This isn't therapy," Richard protested. "I've hired the finest rehabilitation specialists." "And how has that been progressing for Lucas?" Zoe asked, gently. The studio door opened and an elderly woman entered, supported by an elegant cane. She had silver hair in sophisticated braids and a commanding presence. "Dr. Elaine Mercer," Zoe whispered. "Neuroscientist specializing in brain plasticity, Harvard retiree." The woman greeted several children before noticing Richard. "Mr. Montgomery, you've declined my research proposal 3 times over the past 2 years. Dr. Mercer, I didn't anticipate seeing you here. I supervise the research program," she explained. "We're examining how non-directive movement approaches affect neural reorganization in children with motor challenges." "Research?" Richard frowned. "I assumed this was simply a community dance class," Diana returned, having left Lucas exploring movements with another child. "Freedom Steps is a pilot motor rehabilitation program based on movement autonomy theory," she explained. "We integrate adaptive dance with neuroscientific principles." "Why do you work as a server if you lead a research program?" "Because we lack adequate funding, and because individuals like you have rejected us 3 times. The realization hit him. "You were Dr. Mercer's assistant on those proposals?" "Co-author," Dr. Mercer corrected. "Diana has an incomplete master's degree because she had to leave university to care for her sister, but her theoretical work is revolutionary." "You knew my identity at the restaurant," Richard concluded. "From the moment you entered," Diana confirmed. "And when Lucas stood to dance, I recognized the opportunity to demonstrate rather than explain." "Was the dance orchestrated?" "Absolutely not. Lucas chose to stand. I chose to respond." A group of journalists entered the studio. Richard immediately tensed. "What's this about?" "Part 2 of the plan." Diana smiled slightly. Zoe showed Richard a freshly published article. "Revolutionary motor rehabilitation methodology shows promising." Results. "We published our initial findings today," Dr. Mercer explained, "and we invited the media." "You used my son for a publicity campaign." Richard's voice turned ice-cold. Diana led him into a side room where photographs of dozens of children covered the walls, each accompanied by handwritten progress notes. On the final wall hung an empty frame. "What's that?" he asked. "Our future. The complete rehabilitation center we could construct with adequate resources. 500 children annually instead of 50. You orchestrated everything." Richard muttered. "The dance, the meeting, bringing me here on Media Day. I saw an opportunity and seized it. 4 months ago, when you canceled our meeting without reviewing the proposal, I promised myself I'd find a way." "Diana," Zoe interrupted, "it's Lucas." They rushed back to find Lucas in the room's center, surrounded by other children. Someone had silenced the music, and everyone watched in complete quiet. The boy had removed one of his braces and was attempting to balance on just one support. "Lucas!" Richard started forward, but Diana stopped him. "Wait," she whispered. "Watch." Lucas took a deep breath, concentrating. Then, to everyone's amazement, especially his father's, he took a complete step without full support. It was small and unsteady, but entirely his own. The children cheered. Camera flashes erupted. Richard's face, typically composed and unreadable, now showed vulnerability with unshed tears glistening in his eyes. "That's why we created Freedom Steps," Diana said softly. "It's not about perfect steps. It's about first steps taken independently." Richard observed his son, not as a problem to be managed, but as a complete person discovering his own strength. "This could have been accomplished without manipulating me," he said finally. "It could have been if you had returned our calls or read our proposals 3 times. The reporters noticed Richard. A murmur grew as Lucas, oblivious to the tension, continued practicing his new step with pure concentration. Richard Montgomery was trapped. Before him lay 2 choices: withdraw in anger confirming to the press his reputation as cold and calculating, or embrace the moment his son had created. Between the power he had always wielded and the freedom his son needed, Richard found himself in unfamiliar territory, one where neither his wealth nor his influence determined the next move. The man who controlled every aspect of his life now faced a choice that no amount of money could purchase. His gaze shifted between his smiling son and the reporters awaiting his reaction. Humility was not a concept in his vocabulary, but as he witnessed the transformation in Lucas's face, something inside him began to crumble. The symphony of power and privilege he was accustomed to now played a different melody, and he had to decide. Would he continue conducting, or would he learn to follow? Richard Montgomery faced the reporters awaiting his response. His son had just taken an independent step before the cameras, and Diana Johnson had skillfully maneuvered him to this impossible moment. "Mr. Montgomery," a reporter approached, "could you comment on your presence at Freedom Steps today? Is it accurate that your foundation denied funding for this program 3 times? Richard glanced at Lucas, who continued practicing his new step, unaware of the political tension. Then, to everyone's surprise, especially Diana's, he smiled. "Do you know what's most difficult for someone in my position?" Richard addressed the reporter, but spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "Acknowledging when we're wrong." A stunned silence filled the room. The Montgomery Foundation is delighted to announce a commitment to fully fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years and to construct a permanent rehabilitation center based on the methodology developed by Dr. Mercer and Ms. Johnson. Camera flashes. "Exploded," Zoe gasped in surprise. "On one condition," he added, watching Diana tense, "that Ms. Johnson maintains complete autonomy over the program and its methodology. No corporate interference." 3 months later, bulldozers were preparing the ground for the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. The project wasn't the most luxurious the Montgomery Foundation had ever funded, but it was the most innovative, with every space designed through direct input from the children and their families. Diana frequently supervised the construction, but never alone. Lucas appeared regularly, sometimes bringing other children, and to the staff's continued amazement, Richard Montgomery also showed up, quietly observing the progress. "I never expected you'd actually attend board meetings," Diana commented one afternoon as they reviewed the blueprints. "I never expected to be studying neuroplasticity at 50, Richard replied, rubbing his weary eyes. Before him lay a scientific article marked with sticky notes. "But here we are?" Diana looked at the man curiously. "Is this part of your public penance? Or do you genuinely care?" Lucas requested to have his second brace removed last week. "I know. He mentioned it to me. His previous physical therapist said that would be impossible for at least 2 years, Diana smiled. "But you dismissed her, remember? Because you told me she was incorrect. And she was." Diana pointed to a photograph of Lucas balancing with only one crutch. "He's advancing faster than any traditional medical prediction." "Why have you never accepted my apology?" Richard asked suddenly. "Because you never offered one. You redirected resources, changed policies, funded our program. That's not an apology, it's compensation." Richard nodded slowly. "Fair point again." At the opening ceremony 6 months later, the contrast with that night in the restaurant couldn't have been more dramatic. The spacious adaptive facility was filled with children with various types of mobility devices, all moving freely. In the center of the main hall, Lucas, now wearing only a lightweight brace on his left leg, led a small choreographed routine with 3 other children. His movements remained limited, but they flowed with a confidence no doctor had predicted. Richard watched from a distance, not interfering. "He doesn't need you to support him anymore," Diana said, approaching quietly. "No," Richard agreed. "But he still needs me to be present. Crucial difference." Richard turned to face her. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what exactly?" "For teaching me to follow." A reporter approached. "Mr. Montgomery, how does it feel to see your son's progress?" Richard looked at Lucas, who was now helping a younger girl find her balance. proud, not of what he's overcome, but of what he's created for others. And what's been the biggest lesson you've learned on this journey? Richard Montgomery, the man who had once been known only for his financial empire, looked directly into the camera. That true leaders aren't those who guide others down the path they believe is correct, but those who have the courage to follow when someone shows them a better way. A year later, the Freedom Steps program expanded to 3 additional cities. Diana received the Pediatric Rehabilitation Innovation Award, and her methodology began implementation in hospitals nationwide. Lucas, now using only a light cane on challenging days, enrolled in regular school and became a youth spokesperson for the program, inspiring other children to find their own pace. And Richard learned the most difficult and valuable lesson of all: that true power doesn't lie in controlling every move, but in knowing when it's time to step back and let others lead the way. In a world where powerful people rarely change their perspectives, and where those without power often remain in the shadows, the story of Richard, Diana, and Lucas reminds us that genuine transformation occurs when we cross the invisible boundaries that separate us. When a billionaire learns from a waitress, when a father follows in his son's footsteps. If this story about how a simple gesture of dignity changed lives forever touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to our channel, because we believe that the most profound revolutions don't start with grand manifestos or billion-dollar fortunes. They start when someone has the courage to take an authentic first step, and someone else has the wisdom to follow.